Alright, so this is week 2's practice questions, and the first question we have is about the volume of a water tank, and they want us to calculate its height, and they do tell us that we must refer to week 1, question 5.2 for some extra information, and that information is they do tell us that the diameter of the tank is 1,5 meters, which we're going to need. Okay, so to find the height, we need to start by going, well, what do we know? We know about volume, and we know the formula to volume, which you are given, and they do tell us volume is going to be pi times radius squared times by the height. So that's the formula that we're given. So we start by filling in everything that we know. Well, the first thing we know is the volume. So we know it's 8,84 meters cubed. Sorry, not meters, centimeters cubed. We also know that the pi is 3,142. We know the radius is 0,75 squared. And the height is what we're asking. So I'm going to put a question mark for there. Okay, so I've just filled in everything that we need for this question. Now there is a typo in this question. It should actually be meters cubed. So we're going to go with that, because otherwise you're going to get a weirdly tiny number. So now we need to go, how do we calculate? Well, the first thing we see is, what can we simplify? What can we find the answer to? And if I look at this, I can put that into a calculator and get a single number, which is going to make my life a lot easier. So I'm going to start by just leaving everything as it is, but getting the answer to that orange box over there. And if I do that, I get 1,767,375. And you might notice you already kind of had this answer from the previous activity when you were working out the area of the circle for the tank. And so that's times by something. Now the question is, how do I find the something? Well, this is the idea of understanding that I'm doing the opposite calculation. So if this is multiplication that's happening, to find the missing value, I need to do the opposite. I need to divide. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, therefore, 8,84 divided by 1,767,375 should leave me with my answer. Okay, and if you're not sure why that works, you can think of it in a very simple, with basic numbers. If I said 100 is 5 times something, to work out what that something is, you would say, well, 100 divided by 5 gives you 20. Which is obviously what actually gives us 5 times 20 is 100. It's very much the same idea here. I'm going something times 1,767,375 gives me the 8. How do I find the missing value? Okay, and then if I pop that division into a calculator, I'm going to get 2A5,001. That is my question mark, or my height, and therefore I can say my height is equal to approximately 5 meters. Okay, and that's just because I'm rounding off the last decimal places, and I think the question specified to round off to the nearest meter. So that's my final answer for 5.2.3. Right, 5.3.1, we've got here a tree diagram which has to do with balloons of different colors, and it appears whether or not they have a heart or no heart. So the first thing they say is determine the number of balloons at each of the letters. We have A, B, and C. And we can get most of this information from the scenario that was given with it. except for A. Okay, so A is firstly the total number of balloons. You can see all the balloons come from that. So to find that, it's pretty straightforward. We just need to add our three different quantities. We've got 60 red, 240 white, and 360 pink. And by the way, if you weren't sure what the numbers referred to, you can actually check they're in the scenario over there. And you can see, okay, that's what the numbers are. They're relating to the total balloons in each category. So for A, we can just add them together. We go 60 plus 240 plus 360. It's going to give us 660. 660 balloons. That was A. Now B and C, when it comes to the hearts, we need to see what they tell us. And they tell us in the scenario that inside 10% of the pink balloons was a piece of paper with the shape of a heart. So we know 10% have the heart. So this B is 10% of the balloons. And we can see here we have 360 pink balloons. So 10% of 360 is 36, and that would give us for B. And then the last one we have is the ones that don't have the heart. And you can either do this by saying, well, look, if 360 of them are in total, take out the 36 that have hearts, we're going to be left with 324. Or you could have said what was 90% of 360. Both will work for that. Next, they say write down the probability of randomly selecting a balloon that has a heart-shaped paper in it. Well, when we do probability, it's always a fraction. And our fraction is the part we're concerned about. So in this case, we are concerned about the balloon that has a heart shape. And we know there's 36 of them, which was B, over the total that we're actually counting out of. And this is the probability of randomly selecting a balloon. Not a pink balloon, a balloon. So if we're selecting from the balloons in total, it's 36 options out of 660 balloons in total. And they don't mention what format they want us to write that in. So that means we should be completely fine to leave it as a fraction of 36 over 660. When we simplify 36 over 660, we get 3 over 55. Okay, and we always want to give our answers in a fraction in its simplest form. We don't do ratios for probability, and you don't need to worry about percentages or decimals if the question doesn't require it. Okay, then they ask us, what is the probability of receiving a free rose in a simplified fraction format? So what do we know about the free roses? Well, it tells each learner who had a chair with a pink balloon attached to it received the free rose. So how many balloons were pink? 360 of them. How many chairs were there altogether? 660 of them. So 360 out of 660 got the roses, and then we just simplify that, 6 over 11. And again, they don't specify what format they want, they just say, well, no, they do specify, but they just say simplifies fraction, and that is the simplest fraction form. Okay, 4.1, we've got a scenario here about Mr. Lowe, 53 years old, his taxable income of 495,602 Rand, and they tell us he does not contribute to medical aid. So, the first thing that they ask us is the following formula that can be used to calculate annual tax payable before the rebate. So they even give us the formula, and they want us to work out what is the tax payable. Alright, this is a nice, easy, straightforward question, because all we need to do is fill in the values that are missing. So I always say rewrite your whole formula out, make it a little bit bigger, and then you fill in all the parts we know. So 115,762 plus 36%, well 36% you can write as 36 over 100, multiplied by annual taxable income, and for him our annual taxable income was 495,602 minus 488 700, and that's because that's given over there. And it's in brackets. The brackets are important in this case. And then all you actually have to do there is pop it into a calculator to get to a final answer. And if you do, I'll just write it down here, you're going to get to 118,246,72. And that will be your answer for your annual tax payable before the rebate. Right, our next question says that Mr. Lowe feels that the tax table will be an easier option for him to calculate his monthly tax payable, and then they've given us an extract from his tax tables for the right brackets there, and they tell us that the monthly rebate for a person younger than 65 years is 1,368 rand and 75 cents. Verify whether his monthly tax will be correct according to the monthly deduction table. So we're now tying together our previous question with this question. So the first thing we need to do is look at our table and see, well, what should he actually be earning according to the table? So to know that, we need to work out his monthly income, because they only give us his annual income, and his annual income that they gave us was 495,602. So let's work that into monthly so that we can use it in the tax table. We just divide by 12, gives us 41,300,17. Now that tells me from the tax table, if I look at it, it's going to fall in this middle bracket over here. Okay, so therefore, according to our tax table, his tax payable should be sitting at 8491. That's where it should be. Okay, we don't need to worry about taking off rebates and things, because remember, your table already has that off. Now, I'm just going to label this as the table. We need to see what if we did the bracket, because remember, the bracket is always more accurate. So the bracket, we're going to take our answer from the previous one, because we remember the previous one didn't have the rebate off, and our previous answer was 118,246, comma 172, but that was annual, because remember, doing brackets is annual. So first we're going to need to divide by 12. What was it monthly? Gives us 9853,89. Then we need to take off the rebate, and that's why they gave us here that the rebate was so much. So we're going to say 9853,89 minus the 1368,75, and I get to 8485,14. Okay, now we can kind of compare our two values. We have the tax table one and we have our normal one, and they said, will his monthly tax be correct according to the monthly deduction tables? And we can see here there is a clear difference between the two. It's not a big difference, but there is a difference, so therefore it's not correct, and we can just therefore make our conclusion of saying not correct as our final conclusion point there. Now what I will point out is what some people do with this question is where you've got the subtraction of the rebate with the bracket, right, where I subtracted it here. I know some people like to rather first multiply that by 12, then subtract the rebate, and then divide everything by 12, which is more typical to how we normally do rebates. We normally take rebates off the annual figures. It's not wrong to do that. You'll still get to the same conclusion. It's just an extra step in your calculations if you're going to multiply by 12, subtract, and then divide everything by 12. But it would be accepted as a correct method as well. Okay, let's look at 4.3. Okay, 4.1.3 says write down the probability of selecting a monthly tax amount of 8473 for a person over 75 from the monthly tax table that's provided. So we're only worried about the part that's provided. We're looking at our over 75s, and the question is how many of them have a tax amount of 8473. And if you look, none of them do, right? That one doesn't, and neither does the third one. So the probability of that would therefore be 0%. And whenever it's 0%, they normally also accept if you say impossible. It's not going to happen. Okay. Right, let's look at 4.2. Alright, so 4.2.1 says write down in words the total number of vehicles sold in America. And this is quite straightforward. We just have to go make sure you are looking in the right part of your pie chart, America, and they tell us the total number of vehicles sold. And if we're going to just write that out, you are basically writing in words. So it would be 2,500,000. My pen's a bit thick here. Let's try to fix that. 584,000 176. And you just write it out in full over there. Okay. Second question wants us to write as a ratio in the form of something to something to something the number of Toyota RAV4s sold in America, Canada, and South Africa, respectively. So the important thing here is that you are reading in the correct order. So the first one they want is America. So if I go and I look at America, I can see there that the RAV4, Toyota RAV4, is this fully shaded one. So that will be this 4. So let me write that one out first. It's going to be 407,739. Then we need to go to Canada. So we're going to go to Canada next. Canada's RAV4s are over there. And I'm going to write that in the next place in my ratio. So Canada is 934. 934. And then the last one is going to be South Africa. And the South Africa is 36,085. So 36,085. Okay. And then they want it as a ratio, and whenever they ask you for a ratio, generally speaking, they're wanting it in its simplest form. However, in this case, they didn't specify that, so you're comfortable to leave it in that format. Okay. Okay, next question. Write down the median number of best-selling vehicles in South Africa. So in this case, we are only concerned with South Africa, which is our first column over here. So let me remove the others. And they're asking for median. So remember, when we're doing median, the first thing that we need to be doing is working in numeric order. So we need to rewrite these numbers in descending order. So the smallest is 16,426. Then I'm going to 18,235. Oops, 18. Then I'm going to 19,077. 21,887. And 36,085. Okay. Remember, there is normally a mark on writing it in the right order. So make sure you show the step. And then median is our middle number, and our middle number is quite obviously that one over there, 19,077. Next, they ask us to determine the number of Ford F-Series sold in Canada. So this was just reading from a table, right? And we can see here in Canada that we are missing the Ford F-Series value. Should be over here. So to find that, we need to see what is our total and work backwards. So we know the total number of vehicles because they tell us there it's 357,000. So to find the missing value, we can just say, well, if I take 357,243, right, my total, and I take away all of my known values, so the 51,684 from there, the 53,757, the 61,934, and the 73,467. I should get whatever is missing from the last segment, and I get to 116,401. Now logically, does that make sense to my pie chart? Because we always want to check, does our answer make sense? It's the largest value out of the 5 options, and we can see the pie segment is actually the largest segment as well. So it does make sense, and therefore that is most likely, and in this case we know that is the correct answer. Okay, and then our last question here, or not last question, but our next question is 4.2.5. And they tell us here the interquartile range for the top 10 vehicles sold in South Africa is 7669. And they tell us the value of quartile 1 is 1148. What is the value of quartile 3? Well, we start by saying, well, what do we know about interquartile range? Well, we know the interquartile range is Q3 minus Q1. Fill in the values we know. Well, we know our answer should be 7669. Q3 is the thing we don't know, and we know Q1 is 11,408. How do I find the missing value? Well, I work backwards. If this is subtraction, the opposite is going to be addition. So all I'm going to do is say, well, what is 7669 plus 11,408? And my answer will be 19,077. Okay, now you will be probably looking at this going, but there's 4 marks. Why is there 4 marks on a fairly straightforward question? The 4 marks are coming from us basically giving you a mark for understanding IQR. Do you know how it works? Do you understand that it comes from Q3 minus Q1? The second mark is a substitution mark, right? It's filling in those values. Remember, we always give a mark for filling in values into a format or a formula. The third mark is for knowing to add and to rearrange. And then the fourth mark is your final answer mark. Okay, so that's quite a lot of marks for something that is fairly straightforward. Okay, our next question, 4.2.6, is the inflation rate in America for 2021 was 7%. In 2020, it was 1.4%. The price of the Ford F-Series in 2022 was 32,332. It is stated that that the price of the Ford F-Series is 2020 was more than 29,800. Okay, so this is working backwards. It's quite a complicated working backwards question. And I want you to think of this in a very similar way to we think of that. So remember, we have the answer. We now need to work backwards. So we know that in order to get to this value, right, what they would have done is taken the 2021 price and they would have multiplied it by 1,07. Okay, the 1 is coming from the fact I want to include the price, and the 0.7 is the 7%. So in this case, I need to do the opposite. I need to go, and it gave me the 32,332. So now I need to do the opposite. I need to go 32,332 divided by 1,07. Same like if it was VAT. If we were adding VAT, we would say times by 1,15, and then to go backwards, we divide by 1,15. Same concept here, except now it's 7%, not 15%. Okay, and that'll give me to 30,216,83. So remember, this is 2021. And then we're going to do the exact same thing for 2020 by saying, well, look, for 2021, they would have said 2020 times by 1,14. Nope. Okay, be careful of doing it. Times by 0.14. And the naught is there because it's 1,4%, not 14%. So same concept. The 2021 amount we know from our previous calculation is 13,216,83. We're going to divide it by 1,014, and that will give us our final answer of 29,799,63. And that figure over there is now our 2020 price. So the question they ask is, it stated that the vehicle was more than 29,800, and we can see over here it very clearly is not. Therefore we say statement is not valid. Okay. Alright, and our last sub-question for this 4.2, they're asking us here 4.2.7, determine as a percentage the probability of purchasing a Ram pickup truck in America. So let's see. Ram pickup trucks we've got over here, they are the clear ones, so that gives me this value of 569. And we also know our total. So probability as a fraction, we know we always want to start with our fraction. The part that we're concerned with is the Ram, so that's 569,388. The total out of everyone, well, we're talking about the total in America, so 2,584,176. And because they want it as a percentage, we are just going to multiply that by 100 to make it into the percentage. And when you do that, you get to 22,03%. Please make sure you have the percentage symbol in there as well. Okay, and then a nice easy ending off one here. We've got a recipe for scones, and they want us to know, convert the mass of flour into kilograms, and they tell us that our flour that we have is 500 grams. Hopefully you know, or if you don't, you need to learn it, that there are 1,000 grams in a kilogram. So we're just going to, whoops, not with that pen. We're just going to go and say 500 grams divided by 1,000 gives us 0.5 kilograms of flour. Okay, and that was the end of week 2.